The whisper in the empty hall boardroom was quiet, too quiet, and Sundar Pichai felt the weight of all the eyes on him. It was late evening, the glass windows dark with the reflection of the bright lights inside. Around the long table, men and women in suits shifted papers, tapped pens, cleared throats. They were all waiting for him to sign the contract. His hand hovered over the paper, pen ready, thought it should have been the happiest moment of his life. This deal would make him not just rich but powerful, a name that everyone in Silicon Valley would whisper with admiration. The world's largest tech company was about to merge with his vision, his dream. But somewhere deep in his stomach, he felt a strange HEVNES 5 minutes earlier as he had walked to the boardroom. He'd seen her. She was an old cleaning lady, maybe in her 60s, thin and small, wearing a faded blue uniform. Her hair was gray, tied back neatly. She had been mopping the floor near the elevator when Sundar walked past. She looked up and their eyes met for just a second. He nodded politely, but then something unexpected happened. She whispered, so low he almost didn't hear, "Don't." He stopped walking. She didn't say anything else. She just stared at him, her hands gripping the mop, her knuckles white. For a long moment he stood there, confused. Then someone from the boardroom called his name, and the spell broke. He shook his head, forcing a smile, and walked into the room. But now, as he looked at the contract on the table, her word echoed in his head, single quotes. He had no idea why she'd said it. "Mr. Pichai?" One of the lawyers on the other side of the table leaned forward. "Everything all right?" Sundar forced himself to smile again, though his palms were starting to sweat. "Yes, of course," he replied, just taking it in. "This is a big moment." They all chuckled politely. But inside, he was trembling as his pen touched the paper. He saw a faint movement outside the glass wall of the boardroom. It was her the cleaning lady. She stood just outside, in the hall. She wasn't mopping anymore. She just stood there, watching him, her eyes dark and steady. Then she shook her head, very slowly, as if to say no. He froze. Someone in the room cleared their throat again. "Mr. Pichai, we really must proceed." His heart was pounding so hard. He thought they might hear it. He put the pen down. I need a moment," he said. He got up before anyone could stop him and walked out of the boardroom. She was gone. He looked left and right down the empty hallway. But she was nowhere to be seen. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner. He walked further down the hall, calling softly, "Excuse me? Hello?" No answer. He opened a door at the end of the hall and stepped into the maintenance corridor. It was dark with only a single flickering bulb. He saw the mop leaning against the wall, but no sign of her. He called again. "Hello? Ma'am? Did you want to tell me something?" Then he heard a faint sound, like someone crying. He followed the sound down a narrow flight of stairs to the basement. The air grew colder, the walls gray and bare. There she was, sitting on an upturned bucket in the corner, her face in her hands. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Are you all right?" He asked gently. She didn't look up. But her voice, when it came, was sharp and clear. "Don't sign that paper," she said. He stared at her. "Why not?" She lifted her head then, and he was struck by the deep sadness in her eyes. "Because once you do," she said, "you won't be the same." He didn't understand. "What do you mean?" She stood slowly, as if her bones ached. She pointed a thin finger at him. "You'll forget what it means to be kind. You'll forget who you are. You'll forget everyone you ever loved." He shook his head, bewildered. I don't even know you." "How can you say that?" She gave him a bitter smile. "Because I've seen it before." Then she turned and began walking deeper into the basement. He followed her, calling out, "Wait, who are you? What do you know about this deal?" But she didn't answer. She turned a corner, and when he rounded it a second later, she was gone. He stopped, breathless, looking around the empty basement. All he saw was dust and shadows. When he returned to the boardroom 15 minutes later, the lawyers and executives looked annoyed. The CEO of the other company glanced at his watch impatiently. "Everything all right?" Someone asked again. Sundar gave him a tight smile. Just a little dizzy, he said. He sat down. The contract was still in front of him. The pen was still waiting. He looked around at all their expectant faces. Then he thought of her eyes, the sadness. The warning don't single quotes T dot. He picked up the pen again, dot, and then he heard it dot, her voice dot right in his ear. Though no one else reacted. If you sign, she whispered, someone you love will pay the price. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered on the table. Everyone stared at him. Dot. He stood abruptly. I need some air, he muttered. Dot. He left the room before they could stop him. Dot. Out in the hallway. He leaned against the cool glass wall, trying to catch his breath. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. Dot. Message. Dot. From an unknown number. Dot. He opened it. Dot. It was a photo of his daughter. Sleeping in her bed. Dot. The message said, you have until midnight. Decide wisely. Dot. His hands shook. He dropped the phone. When he looked up, he saw her again at the end of the hall. The cleaning lady. She was watching him, and she was crying. He took a step toward her, but the lights above flickered, and when they came back on, she was gone. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Dot. Don't single quote to be late. And that was when Sundar realized this was no ordinary deal. Dot. And he was already in far deeper than he ever imagined. Asterisk. The secret door's moment, Sundar stepped outside into the warm night air. He felt as though the entire city was watching him. The tall buildings loomed above, their glass and steel faces glittering like they were alive, whispering secrets to each other. He stopped on the steps of the building and took a long breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The text on his phone, the photo of his sleeping daughter and the words you have until midnight, still burned in his mind. He felt small, as though the ground beneath his feet wasn't solid anymore. People passed by on the sidewalk, talking into phones, laughing, hurrying to their destinations, completely unaware of the storm churning inside him. His fingers gripped the railing tightly, as if letting go might make him float away. He thought of the cleaning lady's eyes, the sadness, the warning and her last words ringing in his ears. Someone you love will pay the price. He couldn't go back into that boardroom. Not yet. Not with so many questions clawing at him. He had to find her. He needed to know what she meant. What did she know about this deal? What did she know about him? He turned and went back inside. The lobby was quiet now, just the soft hum of the elevators and the faint echo of his footsteps on the marble floor. At the security desk, the guard was nodding off in his chair. Sundar leaned on the counter and cleared his throat softly. The guard straightened, blinking sleep from his eyes. Oh, Mr. Pichai. Everything okay? Sundar forced a polite smile, though his stomach churned. Yes, I'm looking for the cleaning lady, the one who was working earlier near the elevator. Do you know her name? The guard frowned and shook his head. Cleaning lady? I didn't see anyone tonight. Maybe she finished her shift already? Sundar's brow furrowed. She was here, just half an hour ago. She was mopping the floor. The guard rubbed his chin. That's strange. The cleaning crew doesn't come in until after midnight. Are you sure it wasn't one of the staff? Sundar felt a chill run down his spine. No, he said quietly. I'm sure it was her. The guard shrugged helplessly. I can check the cameras if you want. But Sundar was already walking away. He took the elevator back to the floor where the boardroom was. But this time he didn't go inside. Instead, he followed the long hallway past the conference rooms, past the offices, to the door at the end where he had last seen her. The maintenance corridor was even darker now. The single bulb flickered weakly above him, casting long shadows. On the concrete walls, the mop was still there, leaning against the wall. The bucket next to it, but no sign of her. He stood still, listening. The silence was thick, pressing against his ears, broken only by the occasional creak of the building. Then he noticed something strange on the wall to his right. Just behind the mop, there was a faint outline, a rectangular shape, slightly darker than the rest of the wall. He stepped closer and ran his fingers over it. The edges felt different. There was a narrow seam, almost invisible, but definitely there. He pressed against it. Nothing happened. He tried pushing harder. And with a faint click, the panel shifted inward. A rush of cold air hit his face. A door hidden in the wall. He hesitated for only a second before slipping through. On the other side was a narrow staircase, spiraling downward into darkness. The air was damp and smelled faintly of dust and something metallic. He could hear a faint sound below, like water dripping. He descended carefully, his footsteps muffled on the cold stone steps at the bottom. He found himself in a small chamber. The walls were lined with shelves stacked with old files, boxes, and strange equipment he didn't recognize. In the center of the room was a single wooden chair and a low table. On the table sat a thick black notebook. He approached slowly, his eyes scanning the room. There was no sign of the cleaning lady, but something told him she wanted him to find this place. He picked up the notebook. It felt heavy, and the leather cover was worn and cracked. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat but faded. It read, "Those who sign forget themselves. Those who refuse are hunted. You cannot have both." His chest tightened. He flipped through more pages, scanning quickly. Each page was filled with names. Some he recognized, powerful names from the world of technology, politics, business. Next to each name was a date, and then in red ink, a single word. Most of them said, "Gone." Others said, "Obedient." He kept turning pages until he reached one that made his breath catch. His own name. Sundar Pichai written. In the same neat handwriting. Next to it. No date yet. But underneath it, written in red, were the words, "Decides tonight." He slammed the book shut and stumbled back, his mind spinning. Then he heard a soft voice, coming from the shadows in the corner of the room. "You weren't supposed to find this yet." He turned quickly. She was there. The cleaning lady, but now she wasn't wearing the faded blue uniform. She stood tall, her back straight, in a long black coat that almost touched the floor. Her gray hair was loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, no longer sad, burned with something fierce and unyielding. "What is this?" Sundar demanded, his voice shaking despite himself. "What is happening to me? What does this contract have to do with all this?" She stepped closer, and though her face was still lined with age, there was strength in her presence that made him feel like a child. "The contract is a test," she said simply. "A cruel one, and they've been running it for decades. The ones who sign it lose their souls. Little by little, they forget kindness. They forget love. They forget themselves. And they become something else. Obedient, useful, powerful, but hollow." Sundar shook his head, trying to take it in. "Why me? Why now?" She tilted her head slightly. "Because you still have a choice," she said. He swallowed hard. "And if I refuse?" Her expression darkened. "Then you run. And you keep running. Because they'll come for you. And they won't stop until they've broken you, or worse." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And if I sign? My daughter, she's safe?" The woman's gaze softened for the first time. "They lie about that," she whispered. "They use your love to control you. But once you sign, you grow up not knowing who you really are. And one day, she won't even remember your name." Sundar felt something heavy and cold settle in his chest. He lowered himself into the chair, his body suddenly weak. "Then what am I supposed to do?" he asked. She crouched in front of him, her eyes level with his. "You decide," she said. "But you must do it before midnight, because after that, you're no longer you." A sudden loud noise made them both flinch, the sound of the hidden door above slamming shut. Footsteps echoed down the stairs, sharp and fast. Voices followed, low and urgent. The woman straightened immediately. "They're here," she said. "Too soon." She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward another door hidden behind one of the shelves. She pushed it open, revealing a narrow tunnel stretching into darkness. "Go," she ordered. He hesitated, looking back at her. "What about you?" She shook her head. "Go now. I'll hold them off." He stepped into the tunnel. "How will I find you again?" He called softly. She gave him the faintest of smiles. You won't, she said. Then she pushed the door shut behind him, plunging him into darkness. As he stumbled forward into the unknown, the voices behind him grew louder, closer, more menacing, and somewhere ahead, faint but clear, he thought he heard his daughter's laughter, echoing through the tunnel. But he couldn't tell if it was real. Asterisk, the man with no shadows. Tunnel stretched on and on, narrow and cold, the air thick and damp, pressing against Sundar's skin. His feet stumbled over uneven stones, and he kept one hand on the rough wall to guide himself. There was no light except for a faint glow far ahead, like a single candle in a vast darkness. The sound of his own breathing filled his ears, loud and uneven. He tried not to think of the footsteps behind him, the voices he'd heard fading into the distance, but still echoing faintly, like ghosts chasing him through the dark. As he walked, his mind kept returning to his daughter's face. In that photo, her small, peaceful expression as she slept, and to the cleaning lady's last words, "You won't find me again." That thought cut through him like a blade. He wanted to go back for her. He wanted to demand answers, to understand everything, but he knew something deep in his bones now that going back was no longer an option. Whatever path he was on, it only went forward. He pressed on toward the faint glow. After what felt like hours, though it could have been minutes, the tunnel widened, and he emerged into a cavernous space. The glow he'd seen came from hundreds of small lanterns hanging on hooks driven into the walls. They cast a warm golden light that danced over the stone. The ceiling was high and arched, and the air here felt warmer, alive somehow, though it smelled faintly of smoke and earth. He stood there, trying to catch his breath, when he noticed. He was not alone. At the far end of the cavern, sitting on a wooden bench, was a man. He was tall, thin, dressed in an immaculate gray suit that looked absurd in this underground place. His hands rested calmly on his knees, and though his head was tilted slightly down, Sundar felt the weight of his gaze even before the man lifted his eyes. And when he did, Sundar froze. The man's eyes were pale, almost colorless, and yet they seemed to see through him, past his skin and bones, deep into his thoughts. Sundar felt suddenly exposed, like every secret, every fear was written plainly on his face. He took a cautious step closer. Who are you?" he asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. The man smiled faintly, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Someone who used to be like you," he said. His voice was smooth, calm, but carried a strange sadness, as if every word weighed him down. Sundar swallowed. "Do you know what this is? The contract? The test?" The man nodded. Slowly, "More than you could imagine," he replied. Sundar's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Then tell me. Tell me what happens if I sign. Tell me what happens if I don't." The man studied him for a long moment before speaking. "If you sign," he began, "you will succeed. More than you ever dreamed. Your name will shine. People will envy you, respect you, fear you. But one day, you will wake up, and you will not remember the boy you once were. The boy who stood in a small village and dared to dream of something better. You will forget what it means to love without conditions, and you will not even know you've forgotten." Sundar felt his breath catch in his throat. He thought of his daughter again, her tiny hand gripping his finger when she was a baby, the way she used to run to him when he came home at night. The man continued, his voice soft now. "If you refuse," he said, "they will make sure you suffer. They will strip away everything, your position, your name, your safety. They will come for everyone you care about, and they will not stop." Sundar's legs felt weak, and he sat down on a nearby rock, his head in his hands. "So there is no good choice," he murmured. The man stood slowly, his movements graceful, deliberate. He began to walk towards Sundar, and as he passed through the light of the lanterns, Sundar noticed something that made his stomach drop. The man had no shadow. He watched in stunned silence as the man stopped just in front of him and crouched down. So their eyes were level. "No good choice," the man said, echoing Sundar's words. "But there is a true one." Sundar looked up at him, confused. What do you mean? The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, round mirror. He held it up so Sundar could see his own reflection, but what Sundar saw made him recoil. The face staring back at him wasn't his own, not exactly. It looked like him, but older, colder. The eyes were empty, the skin pale, the mouth set in a cruel, thin line. Behind him in the mirror, he could see a great office with floor-to-ceiling windows, a city, spread out below, but he was alone. Utterly alone. This, the man said, tapping the mirror gently, is what waits for you if you sign. You'll win everything and lose everything. Sundar stared at the mirror, unable to tear his eyes away. Then the man slipped the mirror back into his pocket and stood again. But if I refuse? Sundar asked quietly, his voice almost breaking. The man turned his head slightly, as though listening to something only he could hear. Then he spoke, his tone darker now. If you refuse, he said, you'll discover who your enemies truly. You'll feel pain you didn't know you could survive, but you'll still be you, and that may be worth more than anything they can offer. Sundar stood slowly, his knees trembling. Why are you telling me this? Why help me? The man's faint smile returned, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something human in his pale eyes. Because no one helped me, he said simply. Then he stepped back and gestured toward another tunnel, on the far side of the cavern. Go, he said. They're already close. When you reach the surface, you'll have one last chance to decide. But after that, it's over. Sundar hesitated, glancing at the tunnel and then back at the man. Will I see you again? He asked Dot. The man gave a slight shake of his head. I hope not, he said, to Dot without a word. He turned and walked into the shadows, his figure fading until he was gone. Sundar stood alone for a moment longer, his heart pounding, his thoughts spinning wildly. Then he turned toward the tunnel and began to run. The walls of this tunnel were smoother, and as he ran, he could feel the air growing warmer, almost hot, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind him, closer now. He dared not look back. Finally, after what felt like forever, the tunnel ended in a wooden door. He pushed it open and stumbled out into the night. He found himself in a strange place, an old courtyard surrounded by crumbling stone walls. Weeds grew up through cracks in the ground, and the air smelled of rain and ash. The moon hung low in the sky, and everything was bathed in a pale, ghostly light. He stepped forward, trying to understand where he was. When he heard a sound that froze him in place, a child's laughter, he spun around, scanning the shadows out there near the edge of the courtyard. He saw her, his daughter. She stood barefoot in the grass, her nightdress fluttering in the breeze, her dark hair falling around her shoulders. She smiled at him, her eyes bright. Papa, she called softly, her voice full of warmth. He started toward her, but then he stopped, because next to her, standing perfectly still, was the cleaning lady, and in the faint light he could see now that her hands were bound and her face was streaked with blood. She shook her head slowly, her eyes pleading Dot, but the little girl only smiled wider and held out her hand toward him. Come, Papa, she said again, and Sundar stood there, torn between them, his breath coming fast, his mind screaming with confusion and fear. He took one, stepped closer, Dot, and then he heard a voice, low, cold, right behind him. Choose. It whispered Dot asterisk. The choiceth word hung in the air like a knife. Dot choose. Dot, it was barely more than a whisper. But it sank into Sundar's chest, heavy and cold. He could feel it in his bones, in the pit of his stomach. In the space between every frantic heartbeat, he turned his head slightly, though every instinct screamed not to. Behind him stood a figure draped in black, its face hidden by the shadows, though he could sense its eyes on him, sharp and unyielding. He couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, human or something else entirely. Its presence was like ice, like the chill of standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. He wanted to speak, but his throat felt tight, as though the air itself had thickened. He looked back to where his daughter stood, smiling, her little hand still outstretched toward him. The cleaning lady stood just behind her, her eyes dark with pain and something deeper. Sorrow, perhaps, or fear, or both. The figure behind him spoke again, soft and deliberate. One belongs to you, the other does not, but you may not keep. Both. Sundar shook his head weakly. I don't understand, he managed to say, though his voice cracked. You understand. The figure replied simply. Sundar's legs felt weak. He dropped to his knees on the rough stone, his palms pressed against the cold ground. His daughter's laughter floated over to him again, light and sweet, but something about it was wrong, just slightly wrong. There was a sharpness under. The sweetness, like the faint echo of glass breaking. He forced himself to look at her. Her small face, her innocent smile. But the longer he stared, the more he noticed things he hadn't before. The way her feet didn't quite touch the ground. The faint shimmer around her edges. The way her eyes, though bright, held no warmth. Then he looked at the cleaning lady. She stood still, her wrists bound. Her lips slightly parted as though she wanted to speak but couldn't. There was a quiet dignity in her. Even now, even broken and bleeding. She didn't plead. She didn't look afraid for herself. Her eyes were fixed on him, steady, almost forgiving. He swallowed hard, his mind spinning. The figure behind him, choose her. It said, and he knew it meant the child. And everything you desire will be yours? Wealth, respect, safety. No more questions, no more pain. Then it lowered its voice further, until it was almost a growl. Or choose her, it said, and he knew it meant the cleaning lady. And you will suffer, you will lose everything. You will become nothing, but you will remain yourself. The words hit him like a storm. He thought of his daughter's smile in the mornings. She would climb into his bed and curl against his chest. He thought of the long nights he'd worked just to give her a better life. But he also thought of the strange emptiness in her, the way she didn't seem quite real. And then he thought of the cleaning lady. How she had warned him even when it risked everything for her. How she had cried for him when no one else noticed. His chest tightened painfully. Why? He whispered to the figure behind him. Why do I have to choose? Why can't I save them both? The figure did not answer. Instead, the ground beneath him seemed to tremble, and the air thickened until it was hard to breathe. The lanterns around the courtyard flickered wildly, their flames stretching unnaturally high, casting monstrous shadows across the walls. Then the figure raised one arm and pointed toward the little girl. If you sign, it said, she is yours, but she will never truly know you. It lowered the arm and pointed to the cleaning lady. If you refuse, it said, she pays your debt. She suffers so you may remain free. Sundar's hands clenched against the stone. Tears pricked at his eyes. How can I choose between them? He asked softly. The figure's answer was final, cutting through him like ice. You already have, it said. He froze. And then, before he could speak, the little girl's voice rang out again, louder this time, almost impatient. Papa, she called, her hand still reaching. The cleaning lady's lips moved too, though no sound came. But he could read the word on her mouth. D-O-N-T. His chest heaved. He rose to his feet slowly, feeling like his body no longer belonged to him. The courtyard felt smaller now, the walls taller, the air heavier. He took a single step toward his daughter, and stopped, because he saw something. Then for just a second, the illusion broke. Her face shimmered like water disturbed by wind, and beneath it he glimpsed something hollow and cold. Her smile stretched too wide, her eyes glinted with something sharp and hungry. He stumbled back, shaking his head, and then the cleaning lady fell to her knees. Her hands, still bound, clutched at her chest as though she was being crushed. She gasped silently, her face contorted with pain. Sundar turned wildly toward the figure. Stop it, he shouted hoarsely. Stop hurting her. The figure tilted, its head slightly, almost curiously. Then choose, it said again. His whole body shook. He looked between them, the girl with her unnatural smile, the woman with her silent suffering, and something inside him cracked open. He realized in that moment that this was never about winning, never about escaping. It was about who he was willing to become to save himself. He took a deep breath, his mind strangely clear now, though his heart still pounded painfully. Let her go, he said. His voice quiet but firm. The figure did not move. Sundar stepped closer to the cleaning lady, his eyes locked on hers. Let her go, he said again, louder now, his voice carrying through the heavy air. I refuse your deal. The figure remained still, silent, but the ground cracked suddenly, a long jagged line splitting the courtyard in two. Darkness seeped up from the crack, and the air turned bitterly cold. The figure lowered its arm and slowly receded into the shadows, vanishing into the stone like smoke. And then the girl's form shimmered violently, her face twisting into something inhuman, for just a moment before she let out a soundless scream and dissolved into nothing. The courtyard fell silent. Sundar rushed to the cleaning lady and knelt beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gave him a faint smile, full of exhaustion, but also pride. You chose right, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But before he could reply, the courtyard around them began to collapse. The walls cracked, stones falling, lanterns shattering. The sky above split open, and a deafening roar filled the air. He grabbed her hand and tried to pull her up, but her body grew heavier, her eyes closing again. You have to go, she murmured, not without. You? He shot back, his voice breaking, but she shook her head faintly. You already saved me, she whispered. The stones around them fell faster now, dust choking the air, the ground trembling violently. And then, from the darkness above, a single pale hand reached down and gripped Sundar's shoulder with impossible strength. Before he could even react, it yanked him upward, pulling him away from the woman, away from the crumbling courtyard. And into the blinding light, he screamed her name, though he still didn't know it, as the light swallowed him whole, and then everything went black. Asterisk. The reckoning, first thing Sundar noticed was the silence. Not just the absence of sound, but a kind of silence that pressed against his skin and filled his lungs, thick and suffocating. When his eyes fluttered open, he saw nothing at first, only an endless grayish white that stretched out in all directions. There was no floor beneath him, no sky above, no walls to hold him. Just him, suspended in a strange, weightless void. Turned slowly, trying to understand where he was, but every movement felt sluggish, like wading through water. His heart still pounded from what had just happened. The crumbling courtyard. The roar! The cleaning lady's faint whisper. Her hand slipping out of his as he was pulled away. The memory of her eyes, so full of quiet strength even as the world collapsed around her, burned in his chest. Then, faintly, he became aware of something ahead of him. A shape emerging from the white. At first it was just a shadow, but as it came closer, he saw it was a door, a plain wooden door, standing by itself in the nothingness. He stared at it for a long moment, his breath coming fast. Then he reached out and grasped the handle. The wood was warm, almost alive beneath his fingers. For a moment, he hesitated. He thought of everything that had brought him here. The contract waiting on the table, the cleaning lady's warning, the man with no shadow, the little girl's hollow smile. He thought of his daughter. Then he turned the handle and stepped through. On the other side, he found himself standing in vast hall, its ceiling so high he couldn't see where it ended. The floor was polished black stone, smooth as glass, and along the walls hung enormous portraits of men and women he vaguely recognized, titans of industry. Political leaders, innovators. Their faces stared down at him with cold, empty eyes. At the far end of the hall stood a figure. It was tall, dressed in a flawless black suit, its hands clasped behind its back. Though its face was obscured by shadow, Sundar felt its gaze on him, heavy and piercing. He walked slowly toward it, each step echoing loudly in the vast space. When he was close enough, the figure spoke. He refused. It said. Its voice was calm, but underneath there was something sharp, dangerous. Sundar straightened his back and nodded, though his hands trembled slightly at his sides. I refused. He said. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if examining him. If you do, It replied. Sundar swallowed hard. What happens now? For a long moment, the figure didn't answer. Then it raised one hand and snapped its fingers. The hall changed instantly. The black floor cracked and fell away, revealing scenes beneath him, as though he was standing on glass above a vast world. He saw himself in a great office, sitting at a massive desk, signing papers without looking up. He saw his daughter visiting him, but she turned away before he could touch her, her eyes empty, her face cold. He saw crowds of people clapping for him, their hands raw and bloody, their faces blanked out. Then the scene shifted. He saw himself now running through streets, his clothes torn, his hands bloody. Men in black suits followed him, their eyes glowing faintly, their footsteps relentless. He saw himself hiding in alleys, sleeping in shadows, clutching a small photograph of his daughter, its edges worn and frayed. Sundar's breath came faster as the images faded and the black floor sealed itself. Again, the figure spoke once more. You have chosen suffering over silence, it said. But you have chosen truth over illusion. Sundar tightened his jaw. Then so be it, he said. Though his voice shook, the figure moved closer. And now Sundar could see its face, or what should have been a face. But it was empty, just a swirling void where eyes and mouth should have been dotted. Reached into its jacket and pulled out a small, dark box. It handed the box to Sundar, who hesitated before taking it. Inside, the figure said, is the price of your choice. Keep it close. Never open it unless you are ready to pay in full. Sundar stared at the box. It was surprisingly light, but something about it felt wrong, as though the air around it pulsed faintly. When he looked up, the figure was already fading into the shadows. Wait, Sundar called. What's in the box? But the figure was gone. He stood alone in the hall, clutching the box to his chest. The silence pressed in again, then, faintly. He heard a sound behind him. He spun around. There, at the other end of the hall, stood his daughter, but she didn't smile this time. She looked tired, afraid, and behind her, just visible in the gloom, were the men in black suits, their glowing eyes fixed on him. The girl lifted her hand and pointed at him, her voice trembling. They're coming, Papa, she whispered. Then the floor beneath him cracked again, and he fell. He fell through darkness, the box clutched tightly in his hands. When he landed, it was on hard concrete. He looked up and found himself in a narrow alley. The night air cold and damp, the smell of rain and smoke in his lungs. Distant sirens wailed somewhere beyond the walls. He rose slowly, his body aching, and looked down at the box in his hands. Its surface was faintly warm now, and a faint line of red light glowed from the seam. He turned it over in his palms, heart pounding. Then a voice, soft, familiar, came from the darkness behind him. You're running out of time, it said. He spun around. The cleaning lady stood at the mouth of the alley, her uniform torn, her hair loose around her face. Her eyes were full of pain, but also something fiercer now. Defiance. You have to choose again, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He stepped toward her, confused and desperate. I already chose, he said. She shook her head, her eyes shining in the dim light. There's always another choice, she replied. Then she lifted her hand and pointed to the box in his hands. Open it, she said. But the alley behind her was already filling with shadows, tall, dark figures slipping silently out of the gloom, their eyes glowing, their hands reaching. Sundar clutched the box tighter, his breath ragged. Open it now, she repeated, her voice urgent. And Sundar's fingers slipped to the edge of the box. Feeling the faint heat pulsing through it, the shadows moved closer. Her eyes locked on his. Double quotes now, she said again, and then the box began to hum, faint but rising, a sound that seemed to come from inside his own chest. He looked at her one last time. And slowly he began to lift the lid. Asterisk, the final choice of the box, grew heavier in his hands as Sundar's fingers curled around the lid. The faint red light that had glowed along its seam now burned brighter, casting a strange glow on his face and the walls of the narrow alley. The shadows that surrounded him pressed closer, their tall forms silent but undeniable, They're glowing. Eyes fixed on him like predators circling prey, he looked up at the cleaning lady standing at the mouth of the alley. Her hair hung loose around her face, her blue uniform tattered and stained, but her eyes still held that same quiet power, a mixture of sorrow, defiance, and something else he couldn't quite name. She stood perfectly still, her gaze locked on his, as if to remind him that whatever he did next, it would define him forever. The box hummed louder now, a strange vibration that seemed to come not just from the wood, but from the air itself. He thought of all the choices that had led him here, a contract waiting on the boardroom table. The cleaning lady's whispered warning, the man with no shadow, the little girl's hollow smile. Each of those moments weighed heavily on him. Now, as if each choice had been carving a path to this very second dot, and for the first time, he realized something. He was no longer afraid. He took a slow, steady breath and began to lift the lid. The red light spilled out of the box in a sudden rush, painting the alley walls in eerie crimson. The shadows around him froze. The humming grew louder, almost deafening, and then silence. Inside the box lay something unexpected. A single sheet of paper. He stared at it, confused, as the cleaning lady stepped closer. "Read it," she whispered. He lifted the paper carefully and held it up to the red light. On it were 2 short lines written in neat black ink. "You are the contract." "You are the choice?" His hands trembled. "What does it mean?" he asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. The cleaning lady moved. Even closer, her eyes softer now. "It means," she said slowly, "that this was never about them. Not about the board, not about the shadows, not even about her." She gestured faintly to where the little girl, his daughter, stood at the edge of the alley, still watching, though now her face was solemn and quiet, no longer smiling. "This has always been about you," the woman continued. "About whether you trade yourself away for power or suffer to keep what makes you human." Sundar swallowed hard, staring down at the paper again. His mind felt sharp and clear now, even as his heart pounded painfully in his chest. Shadows shifted restlessly at the edges of the alley. One of them finally spoke, its voice low and cold. "Sign." It said. His eyes flicked up at the cleaning lady, and she shook her head. "Tear it," she whispered. He looked back and forth between them, the shadows pressing closer. The faint sound of his daughter's breath in the silence. The box still humming faintly in his hands. He thought of the man in the gray suit. "Few do." It said. He thought of the boardroom table and the pen waiting for him. He thought of his daughter's laugh when she was small, pure and bright and unafraid. He lowered the paper to his lap and closed his eyes. Then, with one slow, deliberate motion, he tore the paper in half. The effect was immediate. The red light flared impossibly bright, blinding him for a moment. And the shadows let out a sound, not quite a scream, but a kind of sharp, collective gasp before dissolving into nothing. The ground beneath him shuddered once, and then grew still. The air around him grew warmer, softer, like spring after a long winter. When he opened his eyes, the alley was empty. The box lay at his feet now, dark and quiet, the faint hum gone. He looked up to find the cleaning lady standing just a few steps away. Her uniform was whole again, her hair neatly tied back. She looked tired, but there was a small, almost imperceptible smile on her face. "You chose," she said softly. He nodded, his throat tight. "Was it enough?" he asked. She studied him for a long moment before replying. "Enough to remain yourself," she said. "Enough to keep what really matters. More than most." He let out a shaky breath, feeling an unexpected weight lifting from his chest. Then he looked past her and saw his daughter standing there. Not the strange, hollow version from before, but the real one, small and warm and real. She ran toward him, her arms outstretched, and when he caught her in his arms, she felt solid, alive. She buried her face against his chest and whispered, "Papa."